Good evening, everyone. Welcome to my weekly live stream. I hope you're all well. I hope you are safe and sound with whatever you're doing. I hope you've had a good week since the last live stream. So, I'm Nick O'Leary, project lead of the Node-RED project. This is my weekly hour or so spent just working on Node-RED development, working on the core, working on the editor, whatever needs doing really. If you're interested, then do say hi in the chat. If you're watching on YouTube, do like, subscribe, and do all that other stuff that you're meant to do on YouTube. Drop a comment. Great to see Softy2K. Nice to see you in the comments as ever. And if you're on Twitch, do say hi. So what are we doing tonight? This is one of those weeks where I know what I'm going to do. Let's see how we get on, and we'll see how useful and interesting it is. Just sort out my windows so I show you what I want to show you, and let's get cracking. So this week at the moment, today started playing around with plugins. So this is one I've mentioned a bit before in previous streams. So this is a new thing coming in the next release of Node-RED, a more formal way to create plugins to customize Node-RED and or the editor. So there are a couple of pull requests if you are, a few different things to look at if you're interested in more details about what I am talking about. So I've lost my windows. Here we are. Let's go here. So with lots of the sort of bigger features of Node-RED, we have our Node-RED designs repository on GitHub. So this is where we have lots of high-level designs for features for Node-RED, where it needs more than just a quick discussion in an issue or on Slack. We prefer to do things via design notes. And there are a couple of design notes relevant to today. So there's the initial plugin work, which spells out the plugin system, for which there is an initial implementation of in the Node-RED core, a pull request. And so what the plugin will let us do is have a node module that contains a plugin and registers a plugin rather than just a node. And that plugin, can then do whatever it needs to do to customize the runtime or equally the editor. And it uses a type system in that the plugin, easier to look, rather than look at the pull request, look at the design note itself, because it just renders better. Plugins. So you can register a plugin with an identifier and a type. So it's a typed system, and we will have a set of predefined types of plugin. But it's very free form, so it's going to be possible to grow the list of what plugins exist, or what types of plugin exist. A plugin doesn't have to have any type. It can just be a complete standalone thing. But what I wanted to play around, because still sort of fleshing out the details, have we got the right design in place for the plugin feature? It's much easier to do that when we've got an actual use being developed alongside it. And the use for plugins that I've started with, and I touched on briefly in an earlier stream, is a library plugin. So following on from last week, where we added the export option to the export nodes dialog, what we're looking at today is making it possible to have more things, more places where you can export stuff to. And you'll see here I've already got, and this is a bit of a dummy example, I already have an extra library called my team dir team directory, which has a flow library in it, which shows up in the UI. So how's that working? Well, how is that working? Well, perhaps before we get there, let me... Library plugins. It's in this list somewhere. No. Pluggable library. That must be it. So the idea here is to have a plugin that is of a known type. In this instance, a Node-RED library source type of plugin, and a plugin of that type is expected to provide a class property which points to a JavaScript class that implements a well-defined API, which at the moment has got something like a constructor, an optional asynchronous initialization function, and then get entry, save entry, and then possibly delete entry as well. But we need to flesh out those details. So that's in the runtime side, because that's the code that will actually do the getting and setting of entry to the library. But then plugins can also have an editor component, and this looks very similar to nodes, but different. That it registers the plugin, and again, with the same ID. Again, for a library plugin, it says it's a Node-RED library source, and then it can have a name, an icon, and then some properties. What I've implemented so far is a test plugin, which has a bunch of stuff to do with plugins, but it's got a library file store. So this is essentially that code from the design note. It registers itself and it implements that API, but you can see it just does a console.log whenever any of those functions are called, and doesn't actually save anything, doesn't actually return anything. It returns an empty array. But you can see it's got some configuration properties that get passed in. On the HTML side, again, it's pretty bare at the moment. It's just got those settings. So the way I've got this set up is, if I just edit my Node-RED settings file, somewhere in here, there we go, under editor theme, where we end up sticking so much, there's this new library setting with sources, which is an array of additional sources. So you get your local library, which you already have today in Node-RED, so you can add extra sources. So here I'm saying, give me a source with an ID of team dir. I want to call it my team dir, and it's of type Node-RED library file store. And Node-RED library file store corresponds to the name of the plugin that we're registering, with an icon and a path. So we're saying that a library source of this type has two properties, name and path are the user configurable ones. So you can see name and path show up here. So I've already done the work in the runtime that if you've statically configured that library, then it shows up here. So you can see my team dir, it's got the taxi cab icon. If I pull up the console, so hopefully you can see it as well. I should delete that broken node because it's never going to connect. You can see if I expand, no, that didn't do it. Does this? Maybe it's doing some caching. Let me try that again. My team dir flows. There you can see file store plugin, get library entry flows. So that plugin code has been invoked by me browsing the library here, which is goodness. If I were to, in fact, if I actually do the export, so just hit export to library in the flows folder, it says exported to the library, and you can see here it says file store plugin save library. But as I showed you, it's just doing console.log. It's not actually storing it. So, yeah, this is the principle, library plugins. People could implement non-file-based library plugins. It could be HTTP-based, could be, I don't know, Git-based. It could be anything, really. Could be a database. But yeah, cool feature. Now there's a lot of work still to do, and what I'm going to do tonight is just make some progress on implementing some more functionality around this. Again, the driving reason to remember is to make sure we've got the functionality we need in the plugins APIs to build something like this. So this is very much experimental. See what works, see if we hit up against problems that the plugins layer should be solving rather than this new library layer. Excuse me. So there are two different things we could look at. One is I could actually create, at the moment I've got this in this test plugin, which is in the source tree with lots of other things, and it's a bit of a no-op. I've shown you it doesn't actually store anything. So at some point I need to create a real plugin that actually stores and actually retrieves. But in some ways we already have that code because it exists in the existing local library code. So whilst I could just go through the motions of largely copy and pasting code around, I don't think that's going to be too interesting for you guys to watch. So the other piece that I've not started on at all here is it's all well and good that the user can edit their settings file to add these additional sources. And for a lot of cases, that should be all they need to do. What I want to explore is allowing the user to add new library sources via the UI. So there's, conceptually having a little plus button down here that they can click to take them to the a settings dialog which lists the configured libraries. So I haven't got a UI design in mind for that. So I think what we're going to do is just do a bit of play around of what that might look like. As ever, any questions in the chat, please do fire away. Otherwise, this is just what I'm poking away at. There's what is there? What was I going to say? I don't know. Let's just crack on. I'm intrigued to know what you guys are doing. Are you? Because I'm just noodling away for an hour or so writing code. Have you guys got me on in the background? Are you watching intently, or are you busy doing other things with me just droning on in the background? Let us know in the chat. So what we've got is the settings dialog. Here we have user settings, view, keyboard, palette, git config if you've got the projects feature. What what I'm proposing is we add another tab to this user setting dialog, where you can manage your libraries. So let's start by getting that in place. The user settings dialog, and this is a great example of I can't remember what I'm doing, or I can't remember how all this works. So there's going to be a few minutes of me just taking you through the code as I remind myself what it does. We've got red.user settings in the editor, which is this user setting dialog, and it exposes an API including this add function. So what we want to do is in library.js, which is when we initialize the libraries. I'm just going to bring it down here somewhere. where am I? Would there also be a way to add custom libraries via settings.js? Yes. So, the idea is, I may have missed it, in your settings.js, there is all, with the code already implemented, you can already add in hard-coded additional library sources. But then if you want the user to be able to dynamically add them, that's also going to be supported. So, yeah. So the user doesn't have to add custom libraries via the UI. They can do it via their settings file. And in fact, as we do with other features, there'll have to be some setting here, and I don't know what it's going to be called, but let's say we call it dynamic. That's a bad name, but for the sake of it, we will have a flag so that you can turn off the ability for the user to edit their library sources in the editor. Because there are plenty of people who embed Node-RED who don't want this functionality, frankly. So as with lots of these bits, we've always got to have flags in there to help people turn on and off these features. Right, so we're going to add a new tab to the user settings dialog. I've got slightly turned around in where we are at the moment. I'm just going to stick it in here. Can it be read-only per library? Yes, it can be read-only per library. So what we have, okay, I'll quickly talk about that because it's a really good question. Now, when I export, it lets me export to clipboard, local, or my team dir. When I do an import, it lets me do local examples and my team dir. So examples is a good example of an existing read-only library. And part of this work is so the existence of local and examples used to be hard-coded in the editor. Part of this pull request is in the settings that the editor loads up now is the libraries block, and you should be able to see here it has the local library and the examples library listed, plus then the ones I've added in my settings file. So it's no longer the case that the local and examples are hard-coded in the editor. Their existence is determined by what's loaded in the settings. And you'll see that there is a read-only flag on the examples library. So it knows if you're doing an export not to show any read-only libraries. Yeah, there we are. One sec, someone's pinging me ferociously on Slack. Let me just yeah, okay, so so that's the plan. Where were we? Adding a user settings dialog. Right, focus, Nick. Right, so we want red.usersettings.add something. That's as far as we got, because we've got red.usersettings. It does this add. Now, I can't remember how I define that API. So let's go find where we do red.usersettings.add in the code. So we've got the keyboard shortcut dialog, we've got the palette manager, and we've got the project settings. I'm going to go with project settings. And to be honest, I'm just going to copy and paste. It's cool. Let's call it the library manager. Got to give it a title, and that needs to be NLS, but just call it libraries for now. Oh, where's my error? Oh, there. Then we have a close function that will get called when the dialog's called, and a get function, which we need to go get a copy of. Interesting. What is that saying? Okay, I'm not going to sweat for that. Right. So obviously we're going to get rid of all those. Create settings. So this is a function that will get called when the settings dialog gets opened. We are going to add a tab, and we need to make sure we get keep the ID consistent. We'll give it its own class later, but yeah, let's do all that, and then we can just stick in a hello world. And I think with that, if we now refresh the editor, when I come to the settings dialog, we now have the libraries tab with hello world. Awesome. Now the order where that's appeared, it's appeared there because just the order which Node-RED initializes the different components. So there's some thought might be needed in terms of what order we want all these to be in. Should libraries be further down? Possibly. But that suggests then we have to initialize the libraries code after we've initialized all the other things. And we just need to make sure there aren't any gotchas as far as, I mean, there's certainly important order to initializing different components, but lots of components, it doesn't matter what order they get initialized. So, okay, here we are. Now what do we want? This is where we can start playing with ideas. What we want in this UI is a list of the libraries that the user has configured. Okay, so what we're going to do, actually we don't want, what I'm going to open up, and it's always worth having open up in parallel, is the CSS for the, where are we, library. Because as we go, we're going to very quickly start building up some CSS styles that we want to be applying as we go. So it's all going to be inside this library manager tab, and we can start straight away by just giving a nice padding so it doesn't crush it to the edges. We're going to create a editable list. An editable list's common component in Node-RED always starts out as an ordered list bit of HTML element. For reasons I'm not entirely happy with, we have to set it. We can't just use class names to position it. We have to do it explicitly. Just, yeah. Let me. Ooh. We want this list to fill the space. Left, right, top, bottom. I'm sure there may be more elegant ways of doing this, but and then append it to the pane. And because we're going to absolute position it, then switch over to our CSS, and we need to set this one's position to relative, so the list gets positioned properly. And then we want to make this an editable list. Okay, now this is where I now go and look up the editable list code. So this is our standard widget for editable lists. If you're watching last week, I used the tree list and the tree list, which gives you the tree structure, is basically lots of editable lists embedded in a tree structure. But I don't think we need a tree structure for this. No, it's flat. There's no hierarchy. I reserve the right to change that, but there are a few options we just need to set. Actually, we probably do want an add button, and we're gonna we'll have an add button, which is true by default. Just trying to think. Yeah, I think we need to have the add item function, which for now we'll just set so this is a function that the editable list will call whenever we add an item to the list, and it's given the HTML element that represents the row in the list, the index where in the list it is, and then the item that's been added to the list. So the purpose of this function is to generate what should it look like in that list. So for now, I'm just quick and dirty just to get something on screen. I'm going to assume the object I pass in has a name property, and I'm just going to set the text of that row element to that. So we've done all that. Now what we're going to do is we are going to get the list of libraries. So libraries is red.settings.libraries, which, if you recall, is from the settings. Basically, that's going to give us this array here. And I'll note that should be label, not name. Then we're going to library list because we want to reference it. We're going to set library list, editable list. We need to set the data, which is done by I thought I had just give me an array. No. Okay. What we're going to do then is libraries for each. Going to iterate over that array, and for each one we are going to add it. So we call the add item function with it. Okay. Let's have a look. So we go to settings. Oh, error. Row.innerHTML is not a function. Oh, of course. Because it's... No, in fact, row is probably a jQuery. Pretty sure that row in this instance is going to be a jQuery wrapped element, but for now, we'll do it that way. Yes, of course. Settings, libraries, and there you can see it's not well, it's all got a little bunched up. So why has that gone wrong? Let's have a look. So we have, let's just work our way up. We have the Library Manager tab, which only has a height of 20. So what that is missing, I think, is a height 100%. Yeah. And then, well, now it's expanded, you can see the items, but let's fix that because it does some calculations. If we just set that to 100% for the moment and refresh. Libraries. Okay. Now, it's, yeah, got a scroll bar, which we shouldn't have. But well, you can see we have our list of 3 libraries, but it's all got a bit funky. The add button is in the wrong place. Yeah, it's all gone a bit wrong. Okay. Let's think through. It's been a while since I've added a new editable list. It has some quirks, shall we say, in terms of how to position it and how to... There's that. There's that. Yeah, okay, so why has that not... What if... Okay, this ought to be easier than this. And I've got a feeling I may have done some of the legwork recently to make this easier to do. We want height to be auto, which... No, I don't think that's what I want. Well, it looks better, but you can see the height being set to auto means it ends up being as big as it needs to be. And every time I hit add and it's adding a blank object, the list grows and the add button migrates off screen. So it'd be much nicer to have we want the list to be a fixed size and for the add button to be in a more predictable place. So what are we going to do? We are going to disable the add button because we're going to add our own. By default, it sticks like you see in like the change node. You get this little add button down the bottom. Which is fine for lots of cases, but often you want the UI to be slightly different. You don't want the add button at the bottom. You might want it in a toolbar at the top. So we hit, say, false to that. We don't want height to be auto. In fact, I'm going to hit undo a few times because I think that CSS is close to being what we want. It needs some tweaking. I'm going to give it that 10 pixel margin all the way around, and we're going to say add button false. Let's see what we get. Oops. Settings, libraries. Okay, so we've got the border, but you can still see it's pushing, it's causing a scroll. Why is it causing? Oops, don't view source. Inspect. Why is it pushing down? What's causing that extra height? So we're saying, that's right. Inner and outer height and box sizing. CSS is just full of these little things to try us. What we want is the box model. No. What is it? Border model. No. Oh, I've gone completely blank. Box sizing. Oh yeah, I can see it a few lines above. So if you've not played with CSS, you've got padding which goes... So if you think of a box with its border, you have padding which goes inside the border, you have margin that goes outside the border, and when you say you want the height to be 100%, it's, well, is that height including the margin? Is that height including the border? Or is it height including the padding? And by default, the height will be the content inside the padding. So by saying I want it to be 100% tall, so fill the space, plus 10 pixels of padding, which isn't what you want. What you want is 100% fill the space and have 10 pixels of padding inside the space. So you use box sizing to tell it to use the border box to define its bounds. One of those little bits of CSS that, well, yeah, one of those things you just learn one day and suddenly things start working. So there we have, yep, no extraneous scroll bar. We have a list in the window with the 3 libraries. So our local library, yada yada and yada yada. Right. Okay, that's good. So let's think about what information could we show in this list. I will also say at some point, from a styling point of view, you can see how we have these other lists fill up the whole window space. So there is a question whether actually this list should have that padding and rounded corners. And again, more pixel pushing to get it to look a bit more consistent. But we'll come to that another time. So for now, I'm just going to do a bit of work. At the moment, I just set the text to the... when I build up the row in the list, I am at the moment just using the label. Then, well, Grant, I'm glad you found my CSS explanation clear. Please don't ask me to explain pretty much anything else to do with CSS, because yeah, that's it can become a world of pain. So what do we want this to look like? Well, a library might have an icon, so it would be nice to show the icon. So we can say if item data.icon, I believe. Let me just flick back. What have we got? We've got an ID, we've got a label, whether it's user defined or not, and whether it has an icon. Yeah. So we're going to say if it's got an icon, we are going to create an I element, and we assume the icon is going to be a class name for the icon. We could do support for custom like SVG icon type thing, but minimum viable product, we're just going to rely on good old Font Awesome. Oh, I am so rusty on this UI work. So if it's got an icon, we'll create the icon, set the class, and then append it to the row. Then we are going to append the text. So we can't just set the text to the row because that would delete the icon we just added. So we'll create a span for that and set its text to. Now there's a little trick I need to do. So you may have spotted and wondered here, no, libraries. Here it says editor:/library.types.local and editor:/library.types.examples. And whereas here it says my team dir. Well, my team dir was the label I gave my hard-coded one. See, my team dir. The others are message catalog entries. So this is how we support NLS. What we do is, rather than just set the text to the raw label, we use red._, which is our message catalog lookup of item data.label. And I'm pretty certain, so if it doesn't find a message with that identifier, it will return the identifier. So the fact that my team data won't resolve, that's absolutely fine. That will get returned, he says confidently. But we shall see. So we add the icon, we add the span with the label in. Let's save that and go and refresh. And there we are. So Just for testing, I'd given my local library a little bathtub icon. Examples doesn't have an icon. Perhaps it should. My TeamDR has got the taxi cab, but it's all a bit squashed. So let's tidy that up. What we're going to do is, what are we going to do? We are going to create, we're going to do it using cells, I think. We will create a first span, and only if it's got an icon will we put that icon in the icon cell. So the first span will be the icon, the second span will be the label, and what we are going to do is row.add class, and this is the red UI settings tab library entry, we're going to call it. Good. So we have, library entry. So what we'll have is a div with that class, and we want, what we're going to do is, we are going to do display flex, I think. And before I went through a period last year of using flex for lots of stuff, and now for the life of me I can't remember the right settings, so just excuse me whilst I remind myself. This one looks likely. We want flex direction row, which I think is the default, but doesn't hurt to be explicit. Oh, I've lost where I was. Right, flex direction, and then we want, or maybe it's grid I want, but no matter. Is that right, flex? Excuse me whilst I go quiet and I just think through this. Yeah, it's been ages since I've done flex stuff, so I'm stumbling around trying to remember. Right, ready to do this. What we want, basically, this flex determines how, as an element grows, how does it allocate the extra space. So if I'm going to give all the spans inside my entry a red border. Let's see what that looks like. Oops. Oh, it didn't do anything. Why didn't that do anything? Oh yeah, it's got outline, but it needs more than that. It needs to be one solid red. There. Okay, so you can see this first span. Well, you can see I've got the two spans, and they're basically as compact as they need to be. What we want, though, is we want to have a fixed width first span. So this is going to be the first child, basically the first column. We want it to be needs it to be an inline block, so it can have a width, and we're going to set its width to 20 pixels, and then we're going to try centering So that now means the first span in each row is going to be a fixed width, and we're going to set flex grow to 0. And then we're going to, we don't get rid of that. We are then going to say span nth child, I think, is that? Oh, this is where I can't remember the syntax. Nth child. Yeah, I had it right, just didn't have the autocomplete, didn't agree with me. So it's going to be the second child. In each row, we're going to say flex grow 1. Settings, libraries, and there we have. Okay, so we've got the icon. You can now see examples which doesn't have an icon, but its cell is that nice fixed width. And you can see how now the label has filled the rest of the space. And as I resize, you can see that the label cell grows to fill the extra space, but the icon stays the size we want it. Now I'm going to make what I'm going to in fact do is set that to width 20 and padding right maybe 8. Let's see, this is where now you risk falling into pushing pixels around. If we turn off the outline so we can see what we're looking at a bit better, if I say padding right, oops, do I say 8? Yeah, that just gives them a little bit more room to breathe. Okay. But now we're going to want to have, there are some flags. So there is, what flags we've got? There is whether it's a user library or not. So that's a flag I set whether this is a library the user can customize in the editor. So you might notice here, team.dir, the one I've added in my settings file, I'm setting the user to false, which you may think is counterintuitive because, well, the user has put it in the settings file. But the reason being, if it's in the settings file, then the user won't be able to customize its settings via the editor because they can't overwrite the settings file via the editor. So the rationale here is these are the libraries that exist that can't be edited in the, they can't be configured in the editor. Eventually there will be others here with that set to true. So what we're going to add is a column for, is it a user? Yeah, is it a user one? And then is it a is it read only or not? Oh, and that's another thing, if you've been following along. The library feature is more than just importing and exporting nodes. The library feature also applies to, for example, the function node, where here you can open and save to library. And this has support for the multiple libraries, just as importing and exporting nodes. And what's noticeable here is I'm doing an import, but the examples library doesn't show up. And that's because in the settings for the examples library, there's support for this types array, which tells the editor what type of thing does that library support. And the examples library only supports the flows type, which means it will only get shown when we're showing UI for the flows type of object in the library. Yeah, so that might be useful for, I don't know, if you have a function node specific library, so it could say I'm only for function nodes. So it would then only show up when dealing with function nodes. Anyway, I digress, as I often do. So settings. Where are we at? So we're going to add some little icons, I think. And if we look at the keyboard UI, oh no, bad example. Yeah, I want to think a little bit about list UIs in general and how we support. Oh, that's curious. Completely distracted myself, but this is a bug which I'm not going to fix now, but hopefully I will at some point. Note, for the git config, it's the pane is bigger than the window, but the scroll bar is scrolling the sidebar tabs as well as the pane. This scroll bar should only be scrolling the internal content. So something for another day, not now. Right. We're going to add some flags to these rows for the different properties because that might be useful. This is very much the way I tinker. When it's UI that I don't have sketched out on paper or mocked up in any way, then tend to spend lots of time just experimenting. We're going to add in a third span which goes after the name, and we want its flex grow to be 0 because we don't need it to take up any more space, and it's, let's say it's 20 pixels as well, sort of standard checkbox type size. And what we are going to do is, wherever this is, so there we had the icon cell, there we had the label. We're going to add another one. This is going to be the, what should we say, the read-only cell. And what we're going to do is say if read-only, then we're going to add an icon. And we are going to use a font awesome icon. And I spend so much time scanning through these icons, trying to look for what's a good thing to mean read only. It could be, in fact, do they have one for, no they don't. What means read only? We want something pencil crossed out. There's pencil. They don't have a crossed out pencil. If there's not an obvious choice, then we won't we won't show it because we don't need an icon for the sake of being an icon. And if it's a stretch to find an icon that makes sense, then if it's not intuitive, then it doesn't help the user. I mean, it doesn't give the user any information. So what does read only mean? You know what, I don't think I'm finding one. No. No. Okay, just for the sake of showing what I'm getting at, let's go for FA thumbtack. I'm not suggesting I use this icon, but just to show what I've done. And hopefully if the CSS is working, what the Flexbox is doing for us is libraries. Oh, interesting. What's happened? Okay. I added it to the wrong cell. So let's I was adding it to the icon cell instead of the read-only cell. So that's on the read-only cell. And I want to get rid of the red border, which isn't there. Oh, maybe the CSS didn't rebuild in the background properly. Although my terminal has been pinging at me. No, we're good. We're good. So library. Oh, it's still red. Where's the red coming from? Yeah, still claiming that I've got CSS for. That usually means. Oh, there it is. Outline solid red. It's right in front of me. But the bit I wanted to get across was because I set flex grow to 0. Notice how the pin is appearing over there, and as I shrink and grow, it's only that middle span that's being allowed to grow. The pin sort of stays where it is. Hey John, good to see you in the chat. So how about FA ban? Yeah. I guess the challenge is coming up with an icon that is meaningful because, and let's look at FA ban. I seem to remember that's I guess the challenge with that is it doesn't necessarily purvey that it's read only, as in you are allowed to read, it's just you can't write. So whether that needs... Now, it doesn't make sense to have a write-only library, a black hole that you can send flows to and never get them back. So I don't know. But again, we're slowly building this up. What I might swap that for is a user one. So I'm going to say if, is that right? Did I call it user? Yeah, user false. So if it's a user library, then give it a user icon, which may or may not make sense. It may be better to have a no, okay. I'm sort of trying to jump lots of steps ahead when there's more groundwork to lay before we can do the fun stuff. So, okay, the icons disappeared because none of them are flagged as user libraries, but that's okay for the moment. So what I wanted was to have a button to add a new library. So let's see, does it make sense? So I've just disabled the add button false line. So we're going to get the default add button. Yeah, which is not positioning right. You can see it's glitching back there. So we're going to leave that disabled. That's what we're going to do. We want... so this is where I don't want to just invent new UI for the sake of it. If we come to the git config pane, you can see here a list, albeit a list of one item, with an add button over here. And when I click add, it expands out an inline dialog where I can add stuff to the list. I think we probably want to try and emulate that as a UI pattern, I think. Do we, or do we, which way around do we do this? Oh, I'm just it's kind of at that point where I've got to do some hard work now to actually. I've sort of done the easy, obvious bit. Throw up a list of information we've already got. It's now a case of, okay, pause for a moment, think, what's the purpose of this dialog? The purpose of this dialog is to allow the user to add new libraries. So we need a button to add a new library. So what we're going to do is, at this point I normally throw in a toolbar. And in that toolbar we're going to add a button. And we're going to give it a class. What we're going to give a class of is a red UI button. I'm going to set its label, and I'm doing it rather than hard coding the label in the HTML there. I'm doing it as a separate call because this will be a endless catalog lookup. Add library. Okay, now we've done that, we need to make sure the list gives it room. So typically we want to push that down by about 30 pixels. Didn't push it down quite enough, but we've got the add library button. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm just going to go with this for now. We are going to, what are we going to do? Having said I'm not going to hard code the text, I'm going to hard code it for now, and I'll worry about finagling the CSS for it later. For the translations for it, because I want to put an add button, a plus symbol. Yeah, okay, it needs a bit more border. There's part of me that wants to stick it over on, make it right-hand align. So I'm just sticking this in, hard coding it in for the moment, just to see what it looks like, and all of this CSS gets pulled out later. And the reason I want, so one of the reasons, apart from the more flexibility I have with positioning for using my own button rather than the button the editor list provides, is yeah, okay, so that kind of works. Maybe add library would be down the bottom. Oh, we could chase it around the UI endlessly. I'm just going to leave it there for the time being. And what we are going to do is add an on-click handler. Stop it submitting anything it shouldn't submit. And what we're going to do is library list or editable list. I'm going to do an add item and just add an empty object to the list. Because what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to support, well, yeah, so I click add library, you can see blank lines appearing, and of course they're blank because they haven't got any of the properties we've used to generate these things. But again, this is where some more design work needs to happen that I'm not going to do here and now, which is there might be some library types that require more than just giving me a list of key value pairs to enter. They might have, they might need a richer configuration UI. So it wouldn't be good enough just to click add for a new row to appear in here. It might click add, takes you to a new UI, new dialog that lets you pick what's the type of library you want to add and then give it its configuration. Yeah. Okay, so we're slowly getting there, and I think this is going to take some more poking around. I'm just trying to think what can I do in the next 5 or 10 minutes just to make some nice progress so it's useful and interesting. Otherwise, you know, this is potentially just lots of fiddly experimenting with the UI to, okay, you know, how do I present a rich UI to what's the flow? Does clicking add library open up a new dialog? Does it slide this box down and show a dialog like the git SSH keys does here? You know, it works, but is it how usable is it really? Maybe the thing to do is spend some time basically reproduce what this does, how this does it, see if that makes sense in this context, and then, well, either run with it or do something else entirely. I don't know. You know what, I'm going to park that for now. I think it's getting on a bit, and I'm wanting to, well, first I want to show you something else that's coming, which I think some of you will really like. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to git stash that so I don't lose it, and I'm not going to commit it for the moment. I'm going to I want to show you what's another pull request that came through a bit of discussion, and it was a bit more fiddly than I was hoping to implement, but it is implemented. And this is coming in 1.3. And this is the ability in, just wait for that to build. Cool. Right, so yeah, huge pivot, nothing to do with libraries. This is, let's just go to a clearer workspace so you can see what's going on. Here I'm injecting a message with payload sent to the current timestamp, message.key set to foo, and message.lookup set to a lookup table. Let's say red and blue. So foo is red, bar is blue. What I want to do is I want to set message.payload to the value of, to the corresponding value of message.lookup that's pointed to by message.key, if that makes sense. So I want to be able to look up foo inside message.lookup and set payload to the value red. Okay, well, you can do that in a function node. I don't think it's controversial. I think anyone would say message.payload is message.lookup using message.key as the value. Okay, simple. That's going to work. Barely need me to prove it to you. So when I inject that, there you go. We get red because I injected, just to repeat, I injected a key of foo and it's done the lookup, and the corresponding value for foo is red. Now, it's a shame to fall back to the function node to do that when we have a change node. So surely, some people ask, it must be possible to do that with a change node. And well, yes, you can fall back to an expression, and I think what you end up with is $lookup of lookup inside the lookup property using topic. Is that the right syntax? Let's deploy that and see what we get. No, that ends up in undefined. $key. Was it key? Oh yeah, no. You are quite right, John. Thank you. So yeah, $lookup. So look up the value of $key inside of the key property. Anyway, you get the idea. So let's try that. Okay, so that worked. And that's nice, but for a new user, it's not very nice to use. What would be much nicer is to be able to type exactly what you would in the function node. So I want to return lookup, which you can do today in Node-RED. And what you could also do today in Node-RED is hard code in foo, and that would work. But with this pull request, you can now nest references to message properties inside. So you can write message.lookup using message.key. So let's see that in action. Red, it worked. Hurrah. Yeah, so you can use nest message properties inside any message dot property in both the change node, the switch node, and in fact it may just work pretty much anywhere that uses the message dot typed input, as long as it uses the library we provide for looking things up, which nodes should. What's also neat is you can also do that in flow and global, so look up in context. The one caveat being is you can only use message properties. You can't use a flow property to look up to do that nested lookup. It has to be a message property. We might add the ability to nest flow or global context properties in the future, but for now it has to be a message. But for the change node, you can actually work around that quite simply by doing, let's say you've got flow.key, so you do a one step of get flow.key into message.temp, and then you can use message.temp down here as part of the lookup. So still, it's useful. Yeah. Anyway, so that's coming, and it's one of those. Every now and then, people do ask in the forum about how do you do that sort of lookup, referential lookup of using or dynamic lookup of a property. And yeah, the function node's fine, but we'd rather, for something as simple as that, then there's no need to fall back to JavaScript. And that will also work in the switch node, as I say. So you can look up, what did we have? So we want to look at the value of message.lookup using message.key as the key. And if it's equal to red, first output, otherwise second output. And then just stick in some debug. And go away. All being well, inject. We get the payload because we've not assigned anything, but you can see it's come through the top. You can see it's highlighting the top debug node. And if we changed this foo to bar, go away. Oh, all these passwords. I need to work out how to squash them. And now when I inject, you can see when I highlight, it's hovering over the bottom debug node because it's looked up the other value. Anyway, that's coming in 1.3, and it was a little fiddly to implement, but pleasing to do so. There's actually a growing list of cool stuff in 1.3, and hopefully we can have a beta of that in the next couple of weeks. Really want to get this plugin stuff a bit more settled. There's a few other areas I want to explore. I mean, exploring the library plugins at the moment. There's a couple other areas of interest for plugins that, I'm keen to have a nice little collection of how plugins will get used. So one of the ideas, and I know some of you in the community have talked to me about this as well, is having theme plugins. So there are already custom themes for Node-RED that you can npm install, and you have to edit your settings file in order to enable which theme you want. Well, if the themes were implemented as plugins, then we would be able to have, rather as well as doing it in your settings file, would be able to have in this settings dialog a drop-down list of all the different themes you have installed, and you'll be able to pick which theme you want. Because they're plugins, so Node-RED is able to dynamically load them, detect them, and all we have to do is define, like we have with the libraries, we just need to define, okay, what do we call, what's the proper type for a theme plugin, and what do they have to expose? What information do they need to expose for the editor to then, when it detects a plugin of a particular type, it's able to do the right thing. Anyway, that's that. That's Node-RED. Pretty much all I was going to cover, plus some more. As ever, any questions, suggestions about what we cover, what I talk about, please do leave a comment. I'm glad to see some new faces in the chat. Do come and say hi on Slack if you want to talk about any more of this in more detail at some point. Otherwise, I will be back same time, same place next Monday. The YouTube video will be up shortly, and have a great week, everyone. Stay well, stay safe, stay sane, and yeah, let's not leave you with Font Awesome, let's leave you with Node-RED. Have a great week, everyone, and I will, see you when I see you. Cheers then. Bye.